Hi, Olu. Hi,
Hi.
everyone. Nice to have you back. Nice to have you back to have these conversations about Africa. So this is going to be our fourth episode on Moments with Africa. And today is going to be, it's not going to be a very different topic, but it's going to be a very relevant topic right now. We're going to be discussing what Africa is meant to do now that Western nations have announced that they're going to be cutting back on development aid. And this is something that is very dear to me and also every single panelist that has come before. And I hope we can have just a few, we can start getting comfortable with being independent, because it starts here. And many times, because we have been accustomed to, asking people to help us, asking people to donate. It's a very customary thing that's been happening since we gained independence, starting in the 60s in many African nations. But again, it starts here. And I hope that when we have these conversations together, especially as Africans, with no one leading us or no one directing us or telling us how we need to do things in Africa, then more of us can start to change their mindsets and they can also start to be more independent. So I will let our guest introduce themselves. Some of you already know him, but please go ahead and introduce yourself and what you do, what your interests are, and then I will present the first subtopic.
All right. Thank you so much, Mary. Thanks for sort of doing this and leading this conversation. I'm sure there's this conversation going on around sort of different platforms, which is great. There are different audiences, and hopefully we can, at some point, sort of consolidate all of this and have some kind of thought process that is, like you said, is sort of led by Africans. My background, very quickly, I'm a Yoruba man from Nigeria, Africa. Like to see myself as sort of African first, or a Yoruba man who is an African, I should say. Before I call myself Nigerian, Nigeria is a creation of colonial borders. I know today we're still having a debate and a lot of trouble discussing we have issues, I'd say, on different borders of the continents that we never had before. I was looking at Eritrea and Ethiopia recently, which is kind of very sad. But anyways, I'm a finance professional. Worked at consulting firms and right now also in the finance world as a banker. I'd say that I think one of the most important things for me, like this topic that we're going to discuss, is on development, because I think it's very important that our continent starts to sort of look inwards of itself rather than looking outwards. And yeah, I would just stop there in terms of my interests. And as we go forward with the conversation, I'm sure there'll be a lot more insights, I'm sure from you as well as from me, as we move forward.
Thank you so much, Olu. I'm really happy to have you back again. We have these conversations a lot on LinkedIn. Some people may already know this. So this is something that is very, very dear to us. We want Africa to do better. We want Africa to stand on its own feet. And we are not looking back. It's probably, in one way, this is, even though I do understand, and I have to say this with a lot of emphasis, that I do understand that a lot of people are going to be affected negatively and are already being affected negatively. I mentioned this in my newsletter last month, and especially refugees in Kenya, all over the world. They are adversely affected by these changes with development aid cuts. And we have to remember that even though we're discussing about, moving forward as an independent continent, there are people suffering because we have been dependent on the systems for very long, for decades, since the 60s. So I acknowledge that, and I acknowledge that people are suffering. So I will start by discussing the effects. So what are the effects of Africa's dependence on foreign aid for essential assistance since independence? So we're starting right from the start. And I can start by saying that, obviously, when we were colonized, the colonialists came in with their own systems, and the systems they brought to us convinced us that we needed them there. So, for example, we needed them there to educate us. We needed them there to teach us English. And remember, teaching us English or French or Portuguese was not for our own benefit. It was for us to be able to give our labor freely. It was for us to be able to be enslaved on our own land. But we were convinced that we needed the systems and we needed to depend on European people to do things for us, even though those things were oppressive, even though they were enslaving us. So obviously this has this has had a bad effect on us even after independence, because when you're accustomed to something, we already know this, it's going to be hard for you to abandon it. And we've not even been given a time to wean off. And I think someone will say, depending on who, on where, on what we are really, what point of colonialism we're talking about, I don't think this particular new move has given us time to prepare ourselves. But then again, if we're looking at the 60s, the early 60s, the late 50s, when you're counting how many decades it's been, then again, you're like, okay, have we not really had enough time to prepare for this? Because I think then we have had enough time to prepare for this. So I think there should be some accountability from the African government side, and also the sectors within it that have been depending on this aid. Because within this time frame, between the 60s and now, 2025, I think we should already have had systems in place that support us as liberated countries. So then again, it shows that we are not really liberated, because how do we move from being enslaved on our own land, being colonized, fighting for independence because it wasn't given freely? How do we move from that point to this point where it's been decades after, and we still believe that we have a right to demand donations or aid from other countries? Then again, something else comes to mind: reparations. I know a lot of people are thinking, well, do they not owe us this? They do. So don't get me wrong. It's not about saying that they don't owe us. They owe us much more than they give us. When we look at post-independence, when we look at how we trade and how our resources are extracted from Africa, we get a shilling for things like uranium. In Burkina Faso, they were getting, I think, for a kilo, they were getting it for, is it 80 cents, I believe, and selling it for, I think, between 200 and 300 euros or dollars elsewhere. And to me, that is theft. So we are owed reparations, but reparations cannot come in the form of aid. So we need to change our mindset first. So number one, they owe us, but how do they owe us? And how are we asking for it? And how do we get it? So there are ways that I think we should have used to get what is owed to us, and it should not have been through development aid. And we are going to be discussing these solutions as we go on, and then even at the end, what we should have done better. But right now, the effects, back to the effects. The effects are devastating, as we see now, because we have a lot of people who've been dependent on a system that can no longer sustain them, that no longer cares, because obviously their priorities were always their own interests. And it doesn't matter to them that there are people who are going to be going hungry. There are women who are depending on, very important programs that support them under feminism and women empowerment. There are so many children who are depending on them under education. For now, they don't know what to do. And another effect of this is that we have made our own governments and corporations and businesses, companies in our own African countries, to just be. They've been relaxing, to be honest. We have made them unaccountable by depending on external sources for funding, for development. And this is very dangerous, I think. I don't know what you think about this, Olu. Maybe you could give me your opinions about this, the effects from your viewpoint.
I mean, yeah, I think you touched on most of the major points. I think the biggest thing, the thing I'll start with is, first, people have to understand that there's truly, let me put it in this context, right? At least in the society we live today, the world is run on a capitalist system, right? And almost everyone thinks as a capitalist, not by choice, but by the effect of the influences of those who make policies and decisions across the world, right? So, I mean, if you start by thinking from that first, and then you move on to the idea that there's really nothing free in this world, there's nothing free. I mean, and if you know that there's nothing free, you always have to ask, what do the people who give these things want? And I think that this is where we sort of sometimes, and I understand it, generally people are concerned about their daily lives, that they don't want to really need to apply any form of like logic or thinking about why somebody's helping. I mean, we just assume that these people are so good and so great, or whoever is giving in general. You should always ask, and that's not to say there aren't people that give willingly, but it takes me to I think maybe the most important point is, why do we think that the people who have an history of invading and looting and taking our things? I remember when we even talk about invading and colonization, I think one narrative, and people can question or can have critique of the narrative, but usually the narrative is that, oh, you know, there are different schools of thought. You know, there are people who believe that, you know, it was all just like invasion and Europeans came in by force and took charge of everything. There are people who think that, oh, like somehow some Africans sent letters to Europeans they did not know, waiting with enslaved people waiting on the beach for them to come by, which I think is a very sort of illogical, thinking. But I think people need to understand that how this actually started is because a lot of when Europeans first came to the continent, Africans in their welcoming nature as they are welcomed them, right? And there was this sort of slow integration. So they didn't come all guns blazing. They came in, you know, like the same way we see sort of generally today now, like the trend of, you know, people coming to Africa and wearing those clothes and everybody's so excited and looking at them and being like, oh, what, you know, they're being part of a culture. I mean, that's how we came. We accepted them. We, you know, and over time, there was a little bit of corruption of our systems, corruption of people, which sort of started some of the activities around capturing people and you know, and sort of selling them in some sense, which is more of like private sort of business. I mean, people can have different, I mean, Africa is so big, there were different sort of systems. I just want to give you a little bit of a background here. And then you realize at some point when some of the kings realized what was happening, they decided to put a stop to it completely. And because they had started to get dependent on getting free labor over time, that was when the sort of the sabotage began, right? The sabotage, creating wars, creating crises, you know, like direct invasions, which we see till today. You know, it's funny that we think that because there isn't colonialism, we still see it today. We see nations being sabotaged. We talk about leaders, like there's the Burkina Faso leader that everybody keeps saying, you know, pray for him and stuff like that. And we know that people are trying to sabotage him, right? We've heard about so many African leaders, true leaders who were assassinated. Yeah, sorry, I think I got muted there. So we've heard about so many African leaders who got assassinated and you know, things like that. So I mean, I say all of this to say that the people who did these things, we truly believe that they are doing good, especially when this aid is coming from nations. Do we truly believe that they have no interest? I saw I don't know if she's still the leader of the European Union. Is it von der Leyen or something? The European one speaking recently, saying they have to counter Russian sort of investment or interest in Africa. And I wonder why the conversation is always countering some other superpowers' interest in Africa, like we're a playground. And if you really understand it, and it's the truth, it's because we're a playground for resources. And so do not think that the money that you see and some of the benefits you see, which by the way, only a fraction of what is said is given really reaches the people in reality. Because if you really understand how aid works, is that a lot of the aid goes back to European and American corporations to develop something that probably ends up not being developed because of partnership with corrupt African leaders. And it's intended that way in reality, just like it started, like I gave the background, right? And so I mean, if we really understand from that context of seeing nothing is really free, we then should start to ask questions and say, okay, so what do they want? Do you get what I mean? Like, what do we really have that they want, right? I understand it's painful to see people who are struggling and see these things taken away from them. But I mean, the solution really should not, I don't think that the solution should be that we continually stay dependent on people, because if you think about it, if you're dependent on somebody for your lunch and your dinner and your breakfast, I mean, you're really a slave of that person, right? Because you're subject to what they say and what they do. I mean, we've seen the international finance institutions like the IMF specifically, I would be very specific, do this as well with some of their loans and the policies that they make countries like Kenya or Nigeria try to impose. We saw a lot of the protests in Kenya. And so I say all this to say that the effect is that we become so dependent and open to taking these things, but we don't really realize that the net effect is a big net negative for us, right? I mean, not just in the short term, because you must understand that there's something that they're getting. I mean, Mary, you just talked about the example of Niger, right? Getting sort of resources for dirt cheap. I mean, somebody's going to go put it on the poster somewhere that they're helping children in Niger. And think about it, like, are you helping children in Niger if you're paying 80 cents for something that costs almost $200 on the market? I mean, think about it. Are you helping? If you really look at net capital flows, and I think I can't remember her name now. But she was the ambassador, I think, to the AU or the UN, and I think she speaks a lot. I listen to her a lot. And so if you really look at capital flows, like actual capital flows, you see that there's a lot of capital flows out of the continent, right? And it's not, capital isn't particularly flowing there, and I'm talking about aid specifically. If you look at the net effects, right? So a lot of the benefits they're getting from our system, which we should use to develop, really doesn't work. And somebody might say, okay, but our African leaders are corrupt and they aren't doing anything. But the truth is that they wouldn't do anything whether there's aid or there's no aid. That's the thing. So, I mean, that's a different topic. That's then left to us to be challenged to, to hold them accountable, like you said. So, I mean, I'll stop there for now, but I'll say that a lot of things, especially on our essential system, things like food. I mean, one thing I think I should have touched on is food, which is very important. I mean, when Europeans colonized Africa, one of the things they did was they turned our systems into changing what we typically grow to feed, right? And into things like cash crops that they would export to Europe for you. So you must understand that, I mean, resources, raw materials and resources is really the focus, right? So even up till food. And so they change a lot of those things. So we see a lot of the food that many Africans probably think is indigenous to our country. We eat every day, like even rice. I mean, big shock, even rice, which is so popular across West Africa and sort of our staple, is not really indigenous to our, I mean, at least the one that we eat, to us, right? So a lot of this maize and all this, because they made us change our systems. And today we don't even remember, we don't know, which I know we'll get to education at some point. But I mean, I think that's really the central point, because a lot of people don't really know what we are losing. I mean, we've seen maybe like Burkina Faso recently rejecting Saudi Arabia's offer to build 200 mosques. I mean, that is really a smart leader, because he understands that that's kind of influence that nations try to get. I mean, if you build those 200 mosques and they know you build it, and then you start sending people there and they start indoctrinating people or infiltrating your system. So, I mean, that's not what the country needs, right? I mean, I don't know if we're going to get to, I mean, religion, because I think that's also a very important sort of factor, which was another sort of prong of the way our systems were changed. And I mean, I'll stop there for now, but I'll just say that this has really made us so, I might even use the word weak, in terms of, because we believe that we need to get these things, or these things, we're dependent on these things, and if they pull these things, think about it, then you have Africans saying, oh, that's not a good thing, we want them to keep it. But the truth is, this is a system that is used to influence returns back to their own system, and you have to ask yourself, what are they getting back? What are they getting back, and what are we losing? That's really, I think, the big piece here.
Yes, and I really love every single point you mentioned, and I have to note here, because we have to speak about these things again. So, for example, food. We have become a people who, before, we used to grow our own crop for our own sustenance. But now it's the same thing in West Africa, in Kenya, everywhere. So people love ugali. Ugali would be fufu, but then you use cassava in West Africa, in Western African nation.
Yeah, cassava
We
is one.
use, yes, exactly, and we use maize meal. And I love this food. Obviously, it's the most common. It's a staple in a Kenyan household. It's a staple in Uganda, in Tanzania, neighboring countries. I think even Rwanda. But people don't even know that maize was not what we used to eat before. Maize is not what we have always been eating. And when you look at the health implications of the foods that have been introduced to us, you can see that it's affecting us. We are going to hospital more. We are having more people dying. We're having more conditions with children. Everything about invasion should be very honest. And through education, we've been taught to be grateful for colonialism. In school, you went to school as well in Nigeria. I don't know if it's the same thing, but in Kenya, they actually examine you, and you're in class. They're teaching you these are the advantages of being colonized by the British, and these are the disadvantages. You are being taught. It's in the textbook. So at the end of the month or 3 months, you should expect that this is going to be a question. I am actually being awarded for saying that yes, it was good to be colonized. I have to actually sit there as a child and write it's a good thing. So this is why, even though we are educated people, we leave school speaking fluent English, fluent Portuguese, fluent French, we are still enslaved people. And this is why these systems continue. This is why we are still colonized. So you mentioned food, and yes, 100% agree on this, and religion as well. We have to speak about it, because as they taught me in the same classroom where I was taught the advantages of colonialism, I was also told that religion and education were tools of colonialism in the same class. And then after that, you have to go to, in Kenya, we used to do CRE. So that's Christian religious education. So in history class, they are teaching you that this is used to control you. And then in the next session, you are having a class about Jesus Christ, about how you're going to be saved by Jesus Christ. And the image they're portraying is not a Black Jesus Christ. I don't know how much that matters, but it does to some people. But the point is this, my own community, the Kikuyu community, was not practicing Christianity. So whether it's a Black or white Jesus, this is not indigenous to my community.
Yeah, I think I'll just touch on the comments you made about CRE. I mean, I never took CRE in school. I knew it was a course. I never actually took it. I mean, I never came across any course where they taught the pros and cons. I probably would have really caused a lot of good trouble in that class if I was in that class. I mean, to be honest, I wouldn't say that I've always been aware. I mean, I think a lot of my awareness and sort of knowledge and digging into and reading books and just observing things have come from maybe later in adulthood and mostly moving to the West, right? And that's when you really start to see sort of how things work. I mean, if you can see, like, I mean, we grew up, I grew up with Africans, right? With Nigerians. So, I mean, we can discuss the issues, but not really understand the impacts, right? I mean, we might not really understand the impacts every day. We just look at the current president and everybody continues this same sort of two-party nonsense that also happens sort of in the West, which is just a facade to keep people thinking that the next party and the next president, so to speak, will be the one that will, and it's just, I mean, control the opposition for the most part. But I would leave that as sort of as that. But I think one important thing with those classes is people have to ask themselves, why? Why do you think a CRE was necessary? Why do you think teaching it in school was necessary? Do you know what I mean? Like, I mean, you just have to like really sit down and think about why do you think it was necessary to teach it at that young? Because we all know, we say it, even as Africans, like generally, like how you raise the child is what they'll turn out to be. I mean, so if that young, you're, think about this structure of colonialism. They took children out of their parents. I mean, every day, the ones that had to go to school or go to the missionary schools, as they were called. And I mean, these same people asked them to cut their hair because they thought your hair was too nappy and your hair was not good, but they kept their own hair. I mean, you really have to think about the people who like raised you and, you know, and built this system inside of you. And if you don't question it, I mean, I don't know what, like, you're doing. If you ask me, I mean, I say if you question something and then you provide answers, logical answers, because one of the challenges I have with our community in general is I think that we assume that God gave us a brain and it becomes useless once we start talking about religion. Do you get what I mean, right? Like, it's like, oh, like,
Yeah.
we use it to make money and to feed and to live. We even use it for survival. But once it comes to religion, like, I mean, we put it aside. And you have to ask yourself, why? Because there's a lot of logical reasons. Like, why do you think the same people who came and abused you and made you cut your hair and all of that, all of those things, and converted, the only things they converted to your languages or found somebody amongst you to convert to your languages was the religion specifically, right? In sense, I mean, they didn't convert to your textbooks. I mean, which we'll get to education at some point, which I think is one of the major problems why a lot of African societies, at least in Nigeria, for example, especially some parts of the North and all of that, are not doing so well in education, in my opinion, is because you're teaching somebody in a language that they don't use on a daily basis. They're not accustomed to. I mean, and that's how they are learning as education. I mean, there's a disconnect there, right? So, I mean, I digress there, but we really need to start questioning these things, right? And asking ourselves, what have we done to ourselves? Because, like, there's a saying that says that if you acknowledge a problem, you've solved 50% of it. But if you don't acknowledge it as a problem, then you just continue to dwell in it, right? And you're looking for solutions outside of yourself or outside of that. Whereas, I mean, you can start from within yourself and say, what do I truly believe, right? Yes. What do I believe around the things I see around me? And does it make sense?
Yes.
I mean, yeah.
I think you've already touched on the second thing. So you're already, because the second thing is asking the same thing you're talking about now. So the second question is, what progress have we seen in the following areas that attract development aid? So there's education. There's humanitarian efforts, there's healthcare, there's refugees in donor nations, agriculture, forestry and fishing, social protection, and environmental protection. And I'm getting this information from Data One because they've listed this as the main areas where the development aid goes into. They also have the figures of how much goes into this. And I'm telling you, the figures are, they are huge. And they also say this, in the last 60 years, total aid has grown nearly sixfold from US dollars, 38 billion in 1960 to US dollars, 223.3 billion in 2023. Can you imagine? So now if we compare this to the progress we have seen, because we are specifically looking at Africa, do we see, is there a mismatch? Is there a match, or what is going on? Because with education, like you mentioned, we are going into schools and we are learning how to do this and that according to Eurocentric standards, going into their systems and working with them, existing with them. But then when it comes to number one, religion, you're not supposed to apply any of that. So you're not allowed to be logical. Even though you came to my ancestors and told them that, you have to be kind, you have to be good, you have to do this, you have to be servant to your master. You have to do all these things, you have to be nice, which we are very nice to people who look like the Jesus that was sold to us. We are very nice to them. And it's not reciprocated. But do we see progress? I mean, with all these trillions going into development, why are we not seeing... Why do we see? Okay, well, I think let me ask this. So, if I go into a room and let's say I'm going to a doctor, if I go into a doctor's office and I have some symptoms and I need some sort of a cure, some sort of medication, some sort of treatment. When I go into that room, when I leave that room, I need to have something solved. If nothing is solved, why was I in there? So, if you're going to introduce all these systems, then leave us alone, independence, and then tell us, okay, fine, we're going to finance this and this and this. And I'm focusing on education because it starts here. If you're going to give all these things to us, but then 60 years after, I cannot sit as a Kenyan, use the English you've taught me, use all the education you've taught me to decide, what? I don't really need aid from these countries because I can do it on my own. I don't need to grow these cash crops to send out there when our own people are starving or relying on food from other places because logically it's not making sense. So what's the progress with all these areas? Humanitarian efforts, as we can see right now, we know there's a lot of things happening in Africa. We see what's happening in the DRC. Again, it's connected to their minerals. We see what's happening in Sudan, connected to their gold. We see what is happening all over the African continent. So all this aid is going into all these things. Then healthcare as well. And I know I have seen on video some, I believe it was in the western part of Kenya. I could be wrong, but I remember seeing a news report of a woman giving birth on the floor. This is Kenya. This is modern times. So I'm just wondering, I want to see what progress we are making with the education we've been given, and also where's the progress with all this development aid that is supposed to be curbing poverty and improving the lives of women, children. So do you see the progress?
So I think the question will be, when you talk about progress, you have to ask what's the starting point, right? So I mean, depending on what the starting point is. If the starting point is from colonialism, post-colonialism, then you could argue that there's progress. But I mean, I don't think that should be the starting point. I think at the end of the day, it all fits back into education, right? So it's like, so many people believe that we didn't have systems, and it's very sad because, like I said, like people don't actually go out of their way to get educated, right? They rely on institutions to educate them, ourselves. I mean, that's just the way the systems are structured everywhere in the world, right? So it's not really African like specific, but like, of course, a lot of the educational systems that we have are Western educational systems, right? I mean, I see here as well, and I'm sure you see it in Sweden. I'm sure you see it, in Finland rather, and I'm sure you see it in a bunch of other European countries, where you see people come out of school and they're educated, and you hear the things that come out of their mouth about the world, about their lives, and you're just like, what is going on here? Like, it doesn't match. Like, you're so well put together, you look like you're so educated, like working this top job, and you're this ignorant. Do you get what I mean in some sense? So because almost everything everybody knows about what they know has been taught to them by somebody, right? And usually by the system, which is why, I mean, I think that they want children going into schools very early, you know, people working, not having that much time. If you think about the way the capitalist system works, of course, as the institutions and the government, so to speak, is spending more time with the children, teaching them, and they become what they are taught. That's just the truth, right? You become what you are taught. And so what has happened is the concept of progress has been seen from the perspective of, oh, we've always been suffering and all, but that's not true, right? That's not true. If anything, like, I mean, everybody should read Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, right? I think very important book to really, and I mean, there are a bunch of other books to really understand what Africa, or how Africa was pre-colonial times, pre-sort of invasion, and then how Africa is now. Because I mean, think about it, like, their museums are filled with a lot of your art, a lot of your artwork and all. And I mean, today, and then they tell you that you didn't have culture. Like, I mean, and some people believe this. I think the sad part is the Africans who actually believe this, because you go to these institutions, or you, and one thing I always say, and I think it's very important to note, is people assume that development means skyscrapers. And I really cannot I can't process it, because it just shows a little bit of like lack of depth, right? Development, like, from what perspective? Development means, I mean, development can't mean skyscrapers, can't mean flashy and shiny things, right? Development has to do with impact on people, right? How people live, what are their standards of living, do you get what I mean? And what is their society like, right? So you can't say a piece is developed when half of the nation, or more than half of the nation, is dependent on drugs to continue surviving, or pharmaceutical drugs in some sense, right? And they are all unhealthy, and nobody, do you get what I mean? Like, I mean, I don't know if that's people have conflated the idea of development with the idea of money and accumulation, right? And accumulating wealth and looking all flashy. And I think that's one challenge, right? So African systems were developed systems, right? Now the idea that we weren't in 2025, and just like with every other system, were developed, right? One of the challenges that people don't understand is that development is not, or in terms of I want to use capitalist progress. Let me put it that way in some sense. It's not, I don't want to say capitalist progress. Let me say progress, like technological progress, because I think that's what a lot of people point to and say, oh, can you compare both sides of the aisle? And I think if you read how Europe underdeveloped Africa, it might shed a bit more light. You must understand that development doesn't, it will happen anywhere that the conditions are present. So if you take away the conditions, which is what happened to Africa, taking away the conditions for development, which is people in survival mode, enslaving them, like having a chokehold on them, reducing their natural population growth because of the harsh conditions and the brutal nature of colonialism. You take away their efforts from things that should develop the systems they have, which could have become what we can't tell right now in some sense, right? Because it just never happened in the sense. You take that condition away, and so it results in chaos, it results in underdevelopment in some sense, which is what we see. So in terms of progress, I don't think that there's been progress in any way, right? If anything, we've gone sort of backward if you really understand how our systems are structured. I mean, education is one piece that I think is super important. Again, people think education is limited to learning chemistry and physics and economics. No, education about self is the most important education that anyone should have. Education about who you are, where you're from, what your values system is in some sense, right? I think one of the things about us that we don't actually know who we are, at least pre-colonial times. We don't know that. We don't know what was important to us. Like we talked about food, we don't know what kind of food we actually ate. And I mean, you talked about food and healthcare. I mean, there's a raging like diabetic problem amongst Africans, right? I mean, and that's because we've abandoned a lot of food that is sort of indigenous to us, which we've always used to stay healthy. I mean, there's some raging health challenges that we have that we just never used to, right? In some sense. And so if I speak quickly on humanitarian, I think that's education, I think encompasses everything, which is, I think it's important that people should understand what they mean by we've seen progress or we've seen development. Is what is the starting point? That's the most important thing. And what do you call development, right? Also, why haven't we developed in the sense that you think we haven't developed? And one of the reasons also is because of what we're talking about, aid. And aid wasn't always called aid. It was direct force. Now it's just like they call it soft power. But soft power is just another way of saying how we control your system through people who are capable of using force on you, which is still the same thing. It's still force, because if you have people walk on the streets of Kenya today, like we've seen the protests, they get shot by police. And let's not forget where police and the Nigerian armies and all the other armies came from. I mean, they are armies today, but they all came from sort of slave catching people that were working for colonial systems. Remember that our military people used to go to a place like Britain to go have their military training, and that's where they got their education. And then they come back to control sort of the system and be the ones who were the controlling, powers in some sense. So if you can connect these dots, you understand that it's just sort of a continuous system in a different framework. And it's only Africans ourselves that can demand something else. Like, do you get what I mean? Like we can't expect somebody from outside to do it, because if anybody from outside, I mean, I've never seen anybody who's more concerned about somebody else than the person themselves. I mean, you get frustrated. And I mean, with the consistency at which they are concerned about us and they have not been frustrated, you must understand that they're getting something from you. Do you get what I mean? And that's really what it is. So I haven't seen progress. I mean, people can argue pros and cons, but I look at it from a net perspective, right? I rather be, if you ask anybody who's Congolese, would you rather have continued living in even if it was pre-Congolese times today versus living in crisis and chaos today, where there's over 7 million people displaced and growing in growing numbers, where African countries are fighting each other because they're being influenced by one party outside who needs the resources. I mean, think about, like, for example, and I know this is a very deep topic to speak about, but people talk about, the Rwandan genocide, for example. I mean, the two groups had lived together for generations before and lived peacefully, had understanding of what their roles were in society. And then colonialism came, and then one group sort of became influenced by colonial masters, and it created this division and this seed such that it resulted in that much crisis. I mean, look at what's happening in Sudan today as well, which is very sad, right? In some sense. So we really have to ask ourselves, when we say development, what do we mean? Are we looking at from a very small lens and only seeing some few pockets of things and the videos and pictures we see, and then feeling like, and why do we feel we are not capable or not willing to solve the problems ourselves? Why do we think we need money from outside? I mean, this is also a problem to me from even the capitalist investment world. We always think we need resources we need to attract investment. But investment you're seeking to attract is always concerned about pulling their money back, and they always pull their money back. So
I want to ask you a question about that, because you work in this sector, in the finance sector.
Yep.
Do you think that, because I think that this giving us aid and, giving us loans and everything, it's putting us in debt. And it's all we forget to talk about this, because we think, okay, you know what, they've given us medication, we have HIV medication, we're going to save lives, which is true, and it's amazing, and we should do that. But then we forget that all this development aid is coming with terms. So these terms are that you're going to be able to get this amount of money from us, but we have to be able to conduct business in your country. We have to be able to get this from you. We have to be able to get this from you. You need to take this loan from us. So people don't look at what we give in return. And I want to know what you think about debt. The debt we're incurring as Africa. What does it mean for us and our future?
I mean, what it means is slavery, really. That's what it means. That's really what it means. I mean, if you want to make it very clear and very simple, that's what I mean. Look, think about personal debt. Like, when you're in personal debt, and those interest rates starts to increase, it creates a lot of problems for you. It creates a lot of distress. It reduces the quality of your life. You have to allocate more money to repaying that. It's the same thing for a nation. I mean, just think about how it impacts you as a person. It's really the same thing. You start cutting, like, you should eat healthy meals instead of buying quality eggs, organic eggs. Now you want to buy the ones that are like, GMO because they're cheaper, and you're like, oh, I have to save all this money rather than eating healthy. That creates health problems. And then you get the health aid. And the health aid is dependent on you continually having health issues. So you see this cycle of, we'll give you a fraction of this money, but that money is creating problems in itself, right? In some sense, because, I mean, think about I see the NGO industry is just what poverty industry, like every capitalist industry. It's focused on growth, and that's why it has grown. The question is, where's the money ending up? That's really the question. I mean, where's the money ending up, and what is getting out of your system, pulled out of? Those two things are very important. Where's the money ending up, and what is being pulled out of your system? I must understand that, and people don't really understand really how this has the capacity to destabilize your country. Like, you pull all this aid out, remember that where the money is going to oftentimes is the pockets of people who have become influential, who are able to mobilize people. Some of them have gained social capital from using these resources to show off as the ones bringing in this money, and so they're able to influence people, right? They're able to influence the population, right, in terms of their ideas, ideologies, what they want them to do, how they think they should vote, how they think they should even react in society. Now, if you pull these resources out, and by default, assuming by them pulling this aid out, you also stop their direct influence, right? Which is, you're no longer changing your policies or listening to them as you used to. Now, those people who have built social capital can still get resources from the same people who are bringing in aid, and be the tools for influencing dissent against government, which I'm not saying dissent against government is in itself entirely bad, but if the purpose is coming from the place of just creating chaos, so that once creates, and we've seen it happen all the time, the same people come back and say, oh, we can help you. I mean, now we see the DRC considering going to meet the US to help them with military aid, and people think that that's a great idea because it will stop lives. And it's a good point. I'm not saying it isn't a good point, but you're going to the person who is the author of the problem. Like, who's the author of the problem to pull the resource? I mean, if you don't believe they're the author of the problem, maybe you need to go do some reading. I mean, if you go look at it's out there who assassinated Lumumba, which was the first democratic leader of the DRC, right? And that's where all of the crisis, I mean, it's been terrible for the DRC even before then, but that's even made it sort of also worse. And so if in some sense, there's involvement there. Why do you think that them coming to help destabilize this? I mean, if I have if I want something from you and I can create chaos so that I'm the only one you come to for solutions, I mean, I wouldn't do that, but I'm saying that that's like how we've seen people operate over the, and just like going back to my initial first statement is, why do you think that they're any different from what they used to be? Why? Like, what? I want to understand the point at which there was like this repentance that makes you believe that the same people who put your ancestors, grandparents or great grandparents in chains and in all these things, why do you think? And remember that under most systems, it is the same people in power that are still in power in some sense. If you really go digging and looking into it, right? That influence and pull the strength. So people might say, oh, people have changed, the world has changed. I mean, really, the world has changed. I don't believe that the world has changed. I think it's just a lie people tell themselves. I know that 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, people understood in their conscience that if you killed somebody and took their thing, you've done something wrong. So I don't think there's this nonsense Western ethics around the idea that there are things that we thought was right before, but now we think is wrong. That's just like a way of covering up stuff that they have done to make you feel like, oh, it's an ethical thing. Before it was okay, now it's no longer okay. But as Africans, why do we think this has changed?
I think we have always been corporations, because we have to go back, because you say we have to always, if you're measuring progress, we have to go from the beginning, and we have to understand what are we measuring and against what. So when we go to the beginning, when the Europeans came and divided our divided our communities into countries, they did this to form corporations. So we are basically corporations today. Yeah. And this is why everything is linking to money. So we're going to give you this, but you have to give us this in return. And we also need to be able to loan you this money, and you have to pay it back at this amount of interest, which is much higher than any developed country should be paying, which already shows, okay, fine. If I go back to the list of the things that where the development aid should be going, it will be going to humanitarian efforts, health, education, refugees and donor nations, agriculture and forestry and fishing, social protection, environment protection. So if I look at the activities of the companies, you as a European or Western entity represent, if I look at all these things, are you doing this? Why are we not able to see that we are just being scammed? This is a scam to me. It is scam to me, because if you care about the social welfare of people, if you care about my environment, why do we have wars? Why do we have one group going to a country, taking advantage of two different communities, having rivalry between them, which was initially started by your presence as an invader, a European invader? So why should I think that you care about these people and the environment when you go take advantage and say that, you know what, I'm going to finance this for you, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do business with you, knowing very well that this entity is harming the other people? So it's all, to me, I'm not even going to call it confusion, to be very honest, Oli. This is not confusion, it's very clear.
It's very clear.
They don't see us as people, they see us as a corporation. And if you look at any corporation, you can leave today and they will replace you in a week. If you're in the top leadership position, let's say a CEO, if you're working there and they decide, you know what, the shareholders decide, or everyone else decide, you know what, this person is a liability. No one is going to be crying tears about you leaving or being abandoned on the streets. They will find someone else and they will replace them. And the same thing with Africa, because they do not see us as people. So to me, there's a mismatch. You cannot tell me that you are here giving us funding to do all these things while all your activities, your business and corporation activities, are doing the reverse. Because to me, that's a scam. And another thing, and this is going back to the effects of development aid, it has made us believe that the same things we do will constitute as criminal offenses or crimes or inhumanity, but they will not be labeled the same thing if a European ancestry person is doing them. They will not be labeled as the same thing when some other communities are doing them to us as well. So this The progress, yes, I do see the progress in that. I can speak English. I wasn't born speaking English, but I wasn't born speaking Kikuyu either.
I don't know. I don't know if I call. I mean, I think it's very dangerous. I'm just saying, like, I mean, people can have their views, but I think it's a dangerous worldview to call speaking English progress, because it wasn't a choice that you made. I mean, do you get what I mean? Like, it wasn't a choice. English is as a result of somebody imposing a language system on you. Today, many people equate speaking English with intelligence, which I find quite interesting, because, like, I mean, it's by default just a colonial mindset. I mean, and I think one of the challenges that we have as well, I would say, is as people, African people, is we think that when we say that somebody has a colonial mindset, it's like, oh, like an abuse or an insult, and everybody wants to be like, no, they don't have colonial mindset. But I think that, like I said, like, you have to accept a problem. And by that, about 50% of it is solved. The truth is that we still run with it because we were educated on the basis of a colonial system. I think people really need to think about what you said about how African countries became in terms of being corporations. Now, there are some who were like personal properties of some genocidal, murderous king, of their king. And there was some, like Nigeria, which was the Royal Niger Company, right? Which ended up transforming into Unilever. And now, I mean, it's, the point is, yes, they were corporations. And people have to understand that the systems there, the governments there, or the leaders like the British Crown or King Crown or whatever it is, those guys used to fund people who were willing to go. So it's like, I'm an investor, I'm funding them to go in there to invade a place, and they claim that they discovered. I mean, I don't even want to get into that. But like, you invade a place, you take control of it. So it's like corporation, and they have to provide returns back. So if you think about the structure, it's the same today. They have to provide returns back to those investors, which is pulling resources out. Today, we're looking for investors from outside. And I'm not saying that don't look for investors from outside, but I know that it's a trend, especially in the finance world. Everybody's building up their business profile so you can attract the investor. And it's all focused on the money, of course, right? And sometimes, I mean, people will say they really want to solve a problem, and I get that. But it's all focused on the money. And like, I think about maybe almost 8 or 9 of our what they call unicorns, that's startups that have become 1 billion. For example, maybe 7 or 8 of them are somewhere in the financial transaction space, which is payments and transactions. And in my thoughts, I'm just like, this is the development we're focusing on. Still an extractive industry, because what you're doing is you're taking money from people to exchange money across board. Yes, you are creating access. I'm not saying that those aren't positives. They're positives. You're creating access. But at the end of the day, you're extracting resources, which is they're extracting parts of this money from people for transacting.
And as we celebrate these people, I was just thinking about this yesterday. I am seeing a lot of Wazungu going into Kenya, Nigeria, and all these places, and it's always the same tech pros, and they are selling the same thing. And I'm thinking, why do we not understand that without us, without my shilling, without the naira, they will not be there? Why do we celebrate these sort of ventures? And also, we go back again to progress and how we've been manipulated to think that, yes, we need investments to catch up, because we're always trying to catch up, right, with the West and the East. So why have we manipulated to believe that the most educated person, number one, has to speak European language? That's the measure. This is the measure in Africa. Let's be honest. You speak in English and you attract the most investors. And I am not talking about African investors. Remember, this is the conditioning. We see ourselves as inferior. So we are not having enough Kenyans and Nigerians coming together to work together. To me, I don't understand. It does not make sense. Why do people have to go outside the continent to find? Usually, it's even people who do not have a lot of experience. I check their LinkedIn profiles. There's investors, these tech dude bros in Kenya, in Nigeria, in South Africa. Because, by the way, they're still going to South Africa. It's not just the ones who colonize the country. And I look at their CVs and I'm like, what was so special about this person, and why couldn't a Nigerian and a Kenyan, a Gambian and a Kenyan, a Sierra Leonean and a Kenyan. Why could they not come together to do this? Instead of having the same thing where we're having a group of Wazungu in Kenya, they're all in top management, and then they're having one or few Kenyans in leadership, but then all the money is coming from us. The money goes back to their countries. We have had in Kenya, I don't remember the name of the company. I think it's a motor company. They failed eventually. And I remember going to a post by a very well-known African, because they were advertising it as a Kenyan company. And when I see something like that, the alarm bells, the red flags go up. And I'm like, what? And I'm checking. It's a British guy. He's failed. He tried and he failed. But then guess what? On his LinkedIn, it already shows they've gone back to the UK. Dude, why do we allow this? I am seeing so many companies. People are coming from everywhere. They're coming from India, very, very common. They're coming from India, and I'm not even talking about the people who've been there since colonialism. They are coming today from India. They're coming into the ad community in Kenya. They're going straight to management positions. We have others coming straight to manufacturing because the Indian community had already dominated this space in Kenya. They're coming to other industries. They're coming now to the tech space. They're coming in, they're creating products, they're creating apps. And I'm not saying that we are not, I'm not saying that people are not invited to do this, but I'm talking of a neo-colonial trend where we are simply given, and it goes back elsewhere. It doesn't circulate on the continent. So why are we doing this still? Why?
I think that it's a combination of things, but before I even get into it, I just want to say that some of those people you mentioned, some of them might not even be real business people. They're just part of the system of part of the grand intelligence, external intelligence system as well. Some of those people are too. So, I mean, it's not all of them that are. I mean, even some of our people, you start to see them putting them in rooms and paying them to write articles and all of that. But anyways, I think one of the challenges with what we've talked about first is value, right? What we see as valuable, right? And I think that's one big piece. Honestly, what we see as valuable is being Western educated and Western raised, right? In some sense. And so by default, it means you see the Westerner as valuable from an educational business perspective. And that's because like you said already, your focus is on catching up to them. And I mean, your focus is on catching up to somebody, you see that person as sort of better in some sense, right? In a sense. And I mean, people can debate whether that is true or not. But I think, I don't know I can't remember his name. Is it James Brown or something? I don't know his name. But he said something. He said that if you desire to give your children a Wazungu, I think that's what you guys call it in Kenya, education, it means that you desire to keep them enslaved, right? If you desire to give them and that's the default, the education that we all got. In fact, the desire, I went to a business school as well in the West that is considered a top business school. So, I mean, that's like the default education. And, so it's not everybody that is going to have a questioning mind, so to speak. I mean, there are people that will just stole this line because that's how to do it and how to get the resources. Remember, I said it's a capitalist system, a mindset. And so because of that value system, that's why there's the idea that if you place everybody together on the same platform, by default, the person who is Western educated or Western, because if Western educated is value, then the person who is from the West, of course, you consider even more valuable. And you see it even in Western countries as well, where you find people who are not even as qualified educated as you get access because, they protect their systems and consider themselves valuable compared to you. It's just by default. I'm not even talking about the people who control policy, just because of the education put out there in the world. That's how we think. Even Africans think that way, believe that everything that, Wazungu touches is great and brilliant. And I'm like, really? And I'm like, okay. Because I'm just like, but I think first is that value system. Second is also some of those companies, where's the investment coming from, right? So if the investment is coming from an external party or somebody else, they are going to make demands or influence who it is that will be the person who is in charge of that investment, right? So that's I think another factor. But I think the most important factor is the value system, because we've seen even African companies, or I mean, most companies in Africa weren't really African companies. I mean, we have a lot more African companies now, but I'm saying over time, we've seen them still keep this trend. And what they do also is also another system of extraction. I won't mention the company, but there was a company I worked for. I was a consultant to that company at the time. And I mean, the three top guys were earning almost half or more than the entire staff. And we're not talking about small staff of like 50 people, we're talking about thousands of people, right? Because they were spread across different countries. And three top guys, and they were doing it through like what you call management contracts, right? Which is just the money going to this foreign investor who is a part investor in the business and just controls the majority of the shares, but maybe something around like just over 50% or so and all of that. And you still have development money coming into this company, which is coming in at cheap rates, because the development money in terms of like companies from like from people who are actually, I think, are doing some good work, like the FDB, some of the African development companies and all of that. I invest in these companies, right, in these places. But because they see those guys, I mean, the goal or the picture those guys paint is that they are doing something great, right? And I think one of the things we're not doing is we're not actually taking a step back and actually measuring the metrics and saying, what is the impact here? Not just in terms of what we see that seems obvious, but what are the other impacts, that maybe the negative impacts as well? Are we assessing that? Which I think is the big factor, because what these guys do, they come under the guise of putting out development, but their goal and intention is still to make profit, usually huge profit. And they might have different ways of making that profit. Like one of the things I mentioned is by putting resources through things like management, expertise, contracts that they bring down here in some sense. And so that's why they do some of those things, right? And so that's really the core. I think that value system is really important. I don't know exactly, but I think in Nigeria, there used to be a time when there was a minimum percentage of, for a company to be registered or something as a public company, I think there's a minimum percentage that Nigerians could own. I don't know if that law, I have to go check again, if it's still in place or if it's outdated or not being followed. But things like that can curb it. So we need some things like government policies that ensure that money is staying within and the majority of the ownership is within, right? But I mean, we live in a world where, like I said, everybody's focused on attracting. I mean, look at the presidents even talk about it. I mean, I feel very embarrassed, honestly, when presidents talk about sending their people to some other country to go and use ads. I'm like, are you joking? Like, are you serious? Like, those kind of things should never be uttered from the mouth of any person. You should be talking about how you can develop yourselves with the resources you have. Taking control of your resources versus taking aid and selling your resources out for cheap because you can't add value to them doesn't make sense. I mean, this is what we need to
remember. We have to remember. You mentioned two things that I can connect to Kenya and the Kenyan president, the current president, President Ruto. Now, when we talk about ownership, we have the same. We have laws in Kenya as well. So, if you want to own an organization, or even if you want to run a non-profit, you have to have this amount of Kenya. The Kenya has to own this percentage. So, one of the reasons we protested was because there was one of those clauses where they were going to allow foreigners not to worry so much about that, then they could get more ownership. That was one of the reasons. So this is what Ruto was trying to do. This is basically selling. If you're trying to change clauses that protect us to be less protective, then you are not working for us. You're working for someone else. The same president, again, the point you raised, the same president is on air every other day talking about how he is proud of how many people he has sent to the Middle East. And then some people actually normally comment and say, by the way, you didn't invent this. We have been going to the Middle East. We have always been sent there. Because then remember, there's also the Arab slave trade.
Yep. Which
I have to specify that, obviously, a lot of people talk about the transatlantic slave trade. We don't talk about the trans-Saharan slave trade. We don't talk about the Arab slave trade. So people are like, well, this has been going on for a very long time. I'm not saying it has specifically happened to, let's say, the Kikuyu community or anything. Like in any other region, it happened on the coastal areas. So the coast of Kenya is the Indian Ocean. And this is where the Indians have come in through. This is where the Arab people have come through. But then this is a president who is doing two things that you mentioned. So this person does not work for the people. And this is why people are protesting, because we need to be able to protect our land, protect our businesses as well. We cannot have all the money going somewhere else, or majority of the money going somewhere else. And I think it's time for us to accept that. And now let me just go straight to the third question, because it touches on that. It's about Pan-African organizations. Now we're talking about presidents, because presidents are supposed to be working with other presidents in other nations, working together. So the third question is, what is the role of Pan-African organizations in fostering relationships within the continent? And I'll go to point A, the African Union. What are they doing? What are they supposed to do? And do they have the coloniality as part of their agenda, according to how they're acting? Because I've had Dr. Arikana, the amazing Dr. Arikana. I was watching yesterday when she talked about, she even said she was giving too much details. She said that. And I remember she was narrating how they went to apply for a loan. So they were there in person. I believe it was with the World Bank. And they very directly said that we will give you this portion of the amount. I can't remember the exact percentage. It was probably, I'm not sure, but it's around 70% or something. But we will give you a certain percentage. When you show us what you have done with it, then we will release the rest of the money. And Dr. Arikana left the room, went to the bathroom, and she called the other leader who was in the meeting with her, so from her side, and she said, "We're not doing this. This is very degrading. This is very disrespectful." But then again, I totally understand that. But aside from being disrespectful, you mentioned the point about trusting the same entities that have been extracting from us, that have enslaved us, to be the same ones to build us. And I'm like, what? So if we are having our ambassadors, the ambassadors in different capacities with the UN or whatever, when we have people who should be representing the African people, the indigenous, I have to be very clear, the indigenous African people. When we have these people as presidents or whatever, working with the African Union and other entities, are they doing the right thing? What are they doing wrong? Is decolonizing our systems and our minds part of the agenda? What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, this is one area that I find a little bit challenging as well, right? Because in terms of processing, I would say, because it sounds like the African Union seems like smokes and mirrors to me, right? In some sense, I don't know. That's kind of like I mean, I couldn't tell what's going on behind the scenes on a daily basis, but just based on the results over the years, it seems like smokes and mirrors. And by that, what do I mean? I mean, I see a lot of conflicts, like not a lot, maybe a couple of conflicts on the continent, and I don't see the African Union's influence. I see these countries having to go to Qatar, who apparently is now the central negotiating body for all crises across. In some sense, it's quite interesting, in my opinion, and you have to wonder whose interest they are, because I know now that most Western nations trying their best, like if you see with Haiti, not to directly appear like they're involved, even though a lot of the resources from those places end up in Western systems. I mean, that's just the reality. It's a fact. It's not whether it goes through the Middle East and comes in here, or it goes directly, or it goes through China and comes, it's still, a lot of it still ends up like in Western countries, right? Because they're resources that they're dependent on. Remember, it's very important to understand that they're dependent on those resources. So when they tell you you're dependent on aid, they are the ones depend on aid, because they depend on those resources and they depend on them for dirt cheap. Because if they don't get it for as cheap as they get it, their cost of production and cost will go up there, which means the standard of living of Westerners will grow up and will go up. And we've seen what happens. I mean, just look at what's happening, for example, in the US, right? With cost of living and all of that going up, and how people are reacting. Those who thought that, you know, their lives will become suddenly better. And we're seeing a lot of revelations around people who are actually the ones dependent on government subsidies and contracts relative to what the trope is, right? In some sense, I mean, go figure, or go look into that in some sense. But the point really is, the African Union just seems like it's incapable if it is willing, because I don't know that it is willing, but it seems like it's incapable of solving these problems. I think one of the main challenges that who makes up the African Union, and it's still a lot of these presidents, right? Like the people who go there, right? Too. And so I'm like, okay, if it's those people that go together. I mean, look at there's a reason why I know we're using them as the standard, and hopefully they keep doing what is great for their people, and hopefully it translates to the African continent. I'm talking about the AES now, who have declined to be a part of systems like ECOWAS and all of these systems. Because I mean, at the end of the day, I guess they realize these systems aren't actually working for them. They appear like they're systems working for them, but they're not, right? So I mean, they're just names. They're just like institutions. And that's what we need to be actually asking ourselves, like, who makes up, what is the African Union doing? Like, what is, I mean, during the time of Kwame Nkrumah, I think they had some sort of progress, and there was a lot of conversations around a united Africa, united sort of like a defense system in some sense, which would help rather than picking sort of countries apart and all of that. But I guess that will be a challenge, because some countries benefit from others because they're already being controlled by, those who buy resources from them, which they use to prop up their own economies. I mean, these are like the main challenge. So, I mean, I think young people in Africa really have to start asking these questions and saying, like, across our different communities, right? Like, and it still speaks to education, right? Like, what are they doing? Why do they have any sort of influence over us if they are not going to act in our interest and actively act in our interest? I mean, look at what happened in, for example, Libya. I know I'm not using it as it's still on the African continent, but what happened there, at least from what we've heard, whether it's rumors or it's true, is, I mean, some people wanted to intervene or go there, and they were informed to not to, like, by Western parts. I mean, it could be rumors, but I mean that's like a popular, or what we've heard across board before Libya was invaded. So it's like, if they don't have powers, if some of the major leaders who on TV come up, presidents of these countries who appear like they have so much power and influence over their own people, if they don't have power to make decisions that impact us and, you know, stop influences that impact us, then I don't really see. That's why I say I can't speak to in depth on the African Union. I would say, I mean, there's a lot of conversations around, you know, trade and free trade agreements, and which we've not really seen come to fruition. I don't know how long it takes, because what I've learned from the last 2 or 3 years is, if you're willing to do something, it actually doesn't take that long. I mean, look at the AES is one example. For example, like Burkina Faso, and even the US is one example with the new administration. Like in 2 months or less than, like, there's a lot of stuff that has been running, whether it's positive or negative, however you want to see it, it's being done. It's being done. So the question is, why aren't these things being done? So it seems like smokes and mirrors to me, right? Where I'm starting to question the relevance in some sense. I mean, hopefully I can find young people being involved so that they understand what is going on in reality, and actually start taking steps to question, maybe put up proposals and ensure that they're demanding their leaders follow those sort of proposals in some sense. But personally, I would say I really don't really don't see what the African Union is doing for Africans at this time.
And I'm comparing, that's very true. You talked about Kwame Nkrumah, and when we go back to those times, when we had like real freedom fighters who are physically fighting for our countries, there's a difference. So obviously we do not have, Ruto is not out there physically getting harmed to lead Kenya. Ruto is calling the colonialist. Ruto is calling France about the DRC of all places. Ruto is not calling his neighbors about it. We've had the Nairobi process. We've had so many, the Angola process. We've had so many interventions for the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. And we have been failing. And this is why Tshisekedi is now going to the US. And we have to be very honest and talk about these failures. So even though we want the right thing to happen in the DRC, we want all this violence to end, all this murder and the genocides and the extraction. We want all these things, and the displacement and the enslavement of including children. We want all those things to end. But we need to start talking about why these leaders in the East African area have failed. We need to talk about it because there's no way you can tell me that. We have a whole entire continent. We have the African Union. We have ECOWAS. We have all these different entities that could come together and find a solution, but they have failed. And this is why when Ethiopia and Somalia as well, when they're having differences and conflict, they are going outside the country. Why do we need mediators from Turkey? Why do we have mediators from the US? Why do we need mediators? Why are we begging at the EU? And I need to be very clear. I am not saying that we should not be going, for example, in the case of the DRC, that we shouldn't be going to the EU to say we need sanctions on this, we need funding to stop. This is exactly what I would do if I were in the position of leadership. This is exactly what I would do. What I'm asking is, why have we failed to the point that we need outsiders who are also our neo-colonialists to be the one to stop our neighbors? So we have to, my point is, we have failed as Africans. Our leaders have failed. Let me be very clear. Our leaders have failed, and we have become very comfortable. And this goes back to what we have been trained to think, where we think that the European, the Arab person, the Indian is better than us. This is something that we believe in Kenya. I can say this with 100% certainty, that this is what the average Kenyan has been taught to believe. So when we think that, how are we ever going to help our neighbors when there's conflict or when there's genocide in two countries, 2 borders down, 2 borders to the right, 2 borders to the north, 1 border up? How are we going to be able to help our neighbors when we ourselves do not see ourselves as equal to the people we run to for help? We leave so much room for people to exploit us, because we cannot do anything for ourselves. We're not doing anything for ourselves as neighbors and also internally. And this is a problem. So when we speak about the Pan-African organizations, when we speak about the AU, we have to also look at ourselves as ordinary citizens and think to ourselves.
Yeah, I agree.
Why don't we do anything?
I agree. I mean, I always say that like the failure is a failure of us. I mean, while I understand that how we think is a function of how we've been sort of raised and educated, which is also what does not move us, because we must understand that the education, and I'm talking about both education in terms of classroom as well as religious education, is structured to keep us docile. And that's the reality. To look elsewhere, to look at, I mean, I look at like a place like, I'll use Nigeria as an example, where we've been praying for change for so long and we haven't seen change. It keeps getting worse. And I'm like, okay, we people that believe that, you know, prayers and this thing work. So, I mean, are we questioning what we're doing? Do you get what I mean? Like, just general, like, we've been praying, we keep praying. I mean, there was even a popular leader who has a lot of influence across board. I won't mention his name here, but maybe at some point, because I think it's important to note how much connection he has with government in terms of the people that he oversees, right? Who are pastors, who are connected or married to people who lead and this person coming on TV and saying prayer is the reason why the dollar to the naira hasn't become worse than it is. I mean, you use the negative, like the worst negatives to influence people further to believe that God is working. Even though it's getting worse, we're just saying that it could have been really worse. So thank God that like it's only just a little bit bad, like a little or like worse. It's not like, I'm like, what is this? And people believe that stuff. People believe that stuff. People like rave over that. And this is one of the challenges. It's that we have been educated to be docile about what is going on with us. Then there's a capitalist perspective, which is the classroom as well, like all throughout the way the structured studies, which focuses away from not being concerned about community and what is happening to people around you versus individual, like building your own wealth. And, you know, like, I mean, there's a saying that, I don't know whether it's popular now, but a couple of people I know say in Nigeria is that they say my Nigeria don't better, my Nigeria don't better when my own don't better, which my Nigeria is good when my own is good. Do you get what I mean, right? So it's like, this is like that focus. So because of that, even within the hardship and how things are getting worse, people think by doubling down, which is the central point of working hard. You know, the capitalist idea is that if you work hard enough, you can also make it, which is a big lie, right? It's if you still believe that stuff, then I don't know what you're doing. It's a big lie, right? I mean, there's going to be a few people who make it to have opulence and all of those type of things, but the majority of people, as we've seen, continue to live at the poverty line / below / struggling, right? And their systems, even though the system has a lot of resources, not working for them. So it's really a theory we have to ask ourselves, and we have to take it back down to smaller communities, up to local government or whatever it is, like systems that they created for us, local government, states, and all these things, right? To say, in those small communities, and it really starts with education, is what are we doing? Why are we getting the value? Why is that, the Maasai community, for example, keeps moving around and keep kicking them out and here and there so that some people can come and create development somewhere? And within those communities, like, you must resist that in some sense, in terms of like, ask questions, even in the Nigerian community, and say, why do you know what I mean? Is it that local government, despite them having all these allocations and all of these things, nothing is working, there's no school here, there's no like proper system. I mean, we have to get involved in our own liberation in some sense, because we must understand that the people who we call leaders are also just like us. There's a combination of things that impact them. I think that's one of the things that I think Nigeria, I mean, Africa, let me say Nigerians, but I think it cuts across Africa, think that we can cop out of our responsibility by saying our leaders. We do this thing all the time. And at what point will it stop? Because if you keep doing it, all you're doing is, life would have been good, but I'll keep doing this, or keep struggling, or keep trying to make it just because of my leaders. No, your leaders are just like you, because your leaders are influenced by a couple of things. They also fear for their lives, if their lives are on the line. They're also greedy, just like most greedy people who are citizens as well, who want to make it for themselves and don't care about other people. And which goes back to the fact that they don't have any power and influence, and that's why they parade themselves across board, because they get those funding from those guys. They pocket that money out of greed and out of whatever it is, want to live life opulence. So, I mean, they're already used to that lifestyle, such that they can't even think for themselves and say, like, let's sit down and solve problems internally ourselves. One big piece, I think, one big chess piece, I think, that is important, in my opinion, though, is when we start to really have sense and ask ourselves, is food. Is to start having control of our food systems and changing our food structure, right? Because I believe that if people can eat and they can live, at least they will be fine. Because one of the challenges too is that we import a lot of food from outside, which means that those who you import from, and they can decide that they want to use it as a tool against you. They've done it before to other nations, right? And say, they're just not going to import food to you, or some of these sanctions, financial sanctions. Because once you start solving the essential problems in your community, right, at that point in time, it's harder for somebody to be able to influence you and say, I will do this. So, I mean, you take, to an extent, some fear out of the equation, right? Because there's still fear. Some people still fear for their lives. If we think that there are African leaders who don't get threatened, they are those that have gotten assassinated. So the ones who even intend to do good, some of them get threatened. It's courage that helps them to stay. So even we Africans have to have courage as well to question the leaders that are not doing right. And we have to understand those leaders come from amongst us. I mean, many of us know some of these people who are uncles and all of that. We want to get contracts from them. We're trying to get connections. And I'm not saying it's bad to want to do business and network and all, but I'm saying you have to also question yourself as to saying, are you exposed to the interest, or do you intend to be exposed to the interest, which is why you keep quiet, or are you just keeping quiet out of not being concerned and being fearful? I mean, another part is you talked about the investment piece earlier. Is once we're thinking as Africans, especially when we are all over the world, like in the West and all of that, pulling resources and taking back home and setting some kind of venture, or I know it's hard to vet and do all of those things, but the more we start thinking about being a part of solving our problems, right, the better it will get. Because if we can do that collectively in some sense in our communities, then people maybe are not as reliant on the government as much as they will be. And then it creates a level of freedom where they are not scared to say certain things because they might lose their job or they might lose their livelihood and all of that. And then maybe it just gets to, they're scared they might lose their lives. But then at that point in time, you then have to figure out what's more important. Do you want to live as a slave forever, or do you want to ensure that things actually truly change? Because there are many people who are so-called leaders that we have who are either captured, just as greedy as well. And so they're doing whatever it is that they want. And that's why they'll go to all these other places, because those people have them in their pockets in some sense. And it's not for our own benefit, because at the end of the day, it's about the resources on our land that they're trying to pull from our land. And they have the tools of, I think one of the big problems is violence, right? It's the violence. They have the tools for violence. And where do they get these tools for violence? From them. I remember, even this is also another industry, and our NDA, this is also another industry we must understand. Our NDA is the weapons manufacturing industry. It's also an industry, it's owned by private. Anytime you see an industry, I heard somebody talking about private prisons, and anytime you see an industry that is privatized, the intent of private corporations, as we understand from a capitalist system, is profit. And their goals are to grow. If their goals are to grow, ask yourself, what are they talking about in their strategy sessions? If you cannot grow, you create the conditions to grow. And if you think about it like that, why is it that every time we have crisis, our resources are being pulled out illegally, which means for dirt cheap or for nothing, for free, being stolen, and then our countries are forced to buy weapons from these same people and send our resources there? And they keep selling weapons and selling weapons. If there's no war, there's not going to be weapons sale. And I am of the opinion that's why there's war. I mean, people can argue otherwise, right? That's why there's constant conflicts that get escalated. So we have to start holding ourselves accountable. Where is our, like, what is our thought process? And if we think that individual progress will save us, I'm sorry to say, as we've started to see someplace in the West and all, we are moving towards a world where that will not, like, your community is probably going to be the biggest piece. And you have to start investing in that community. First, from your own mindset in terms of changing, like thinking and questioning the narrative that you always know. Start talking about, having conversations about what is going on. Be involved. Like, don't just sit on sidelines and say these conversations for some people, or what will talking do? Yes, what will talking do? But talking sometimes spurs people to action over time, right? So get involved in conversation, get involved in investing back home, get involved in solving problems for your own community as much as you can. And then hopefully that way, as time goes on, we'll be able to like turn this around. But like I said, one of the biggest things I think we should invest in is, I start thinking about, is food and education. Those two are very, very important, I would say.
Thank you so much. And now I'm thinking about, like you mentioned, no one is going to create weapons if they do not plan to sell those weapons. So
yeah.
This is something we forget as Africans when we discuss about this. The same people being our investors, when they're the same ones who are creating weapons that need to be used somewhere. They will not be used in their own countries. Will not be used. They will be used somewhere else, and it will probably be somewhere in Africa or somewhere in the global south. So we need for Africans to start having conversations about this. And now I want to move to one of the second last topics where we've now talked about the AU, the African Union, but I see that we have a readiness as African people to compare ourselves to the EU. I see a readiness to do that. But do we have the capacity to emulate them? And I will start by saying that as a person who lives in Finland, Finland is known for very many things. Now, it's for many years, it's been known to be one of the happiest countries in the world. The education system is well praised, like in other places. I mean, well, not the US, but I mean, individual schools, of course. I mean, they are praised, but I mean, this is a very small population. In Finland, we are not even at 6 million. So people don't even think about those other things. They're just like, oh yeah, this country is perfect. People are happy. The women are almost equal to men. I can agree, 100% I can agree that in Finland, we are so much further ahead than other developed countries in certain areas, even in healthcare. So I don't need to worry about, oh my God, am I going to be going to poverty because if I ever get sick, or do I have to worry, do I have money if I want to have a child and, go into hospital and give birth, can I be able to afford it? These are not things that I think about. Of course, I think about, generally like any person, I need money to be able to sustain myself and children. But basically the worries are not as similar to other places because we are a bit better. But we are trying to compare ourselves to the EU, but people don't understand. People who haven't come to these places in Western nations don't understand that. Number one, Finland has to make sure that their own people are well before they start thinking about coming into partnerships with other countries. So when we compare African nations, if I choose, for example, healthcare, let's leave education because we've talked about that extensively. If I go to pick any country in Kenya, let me use Kenya. When I look at the healthcare, can I say that it's comparable to a country in the Nordic region? I cannot say that. And the peculiar thing is that, well, not peculiar, but the interesting part is that we have people who come from other East African countries to be treated in Kenya, while Kenya itself cannot be compared to many countries outside the continent. A lot of leaders are also going to places like South Africa for medical attention. There are people who are going to Ghana, Nigeria. They're going to these countries that are doing better than others. But then our leaders, where do they go for most of them? If they're not going to other Europe, usually, let's be honest, they're going outside the continent. Let's be honest. Right now, we have a governor, a Kenyan governor. She just had a baby and she went to the US to have a baby there. We know why. And there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of noise. I was watching the news yesterday and people are like, it's been months. And then, now listen to this part. A group of women parliamentarians, they called a conference to defend her. Now, as a woman, listen, I have to look at this from different angles because I am an African woman. And I know the healthcare in Kenya. I know the healthcare in Western nations. So there's a lot going on in here. But this is the thing. This governor is a child of a former politician. So I don't need to tell you that their life is comfortable. They have lived a only comfortable life. Number two, I have to say that I understand that there's more judgment when it comes to being a woman or even a mother. So I need to emphasize that I am aware of this, that a man does not even have to go on maternity leave or paternity leave in Kenya. A man does not have to worry about, the future of my child. So let me go give birth in this country so that they have this opportunity. They don't have to think about that. Men can do whatever they want, usually, politicians, as we can see in Nigeria. That is another one. I think you know what I'm talking about. It's hideous happening to Senator Natasha. But I then go back to another viewpoint where I'm thinking, well, you chose to be a governor of the governor of this people. You knew that the hospitals were like this. You knew that the healthcare is like this. Do you honestly expect for your constituents to sit there and say, well, you know what? It's okay. She has these privileges that we don't have. She can get on a flight anytime to go to the US. She can have a baby there. She can relax there. While we do not have maternity policies, there's a lot going on here. So there's number one, can I go to a hospital in Nakuru or Nairobi and be able to get the same kind of treatment as my governor? Can I be able to, am I going to have the same policies? I want to rest for a few months. I want to be able to enjoy, bond with my child, which every parent should. We do that in Finland. You can be away for over a year and your job is going to be there waiting for you. We are very protected. But then your constituents don't have the same privileges. So then I cannot just think about being a woman and, thinking about the future of your child and protecting them. And because you know what, I can understand that you want to have your child in the best facility. That I can understand. I will not take this from any woman. And I'm also asking, your people that you are leading, you are getting a salary, you are getting paid to lead them. They do not have these opportunities. What are they supposed to think? So we compare ourselves and we talk about, what we need to have open borders, we need to have a lot of things that I really agree. What I find troubling is that when we have conversations about having a more accessible Africa for Africans, we don't talk about every single thing. We do not compare what European nations are doing. For example, I mentioned that they make sure that, they're trying to make sure that women get this and that. They make sure that their children are educated. The education system is well praised globally. They do this. Can we say the same about African countries? Can we say that, Cameroonians are doing the same thing as Kenyans or South Africans or Nigerians when they've had a president who's been there since I was a few years old and I'm already over 40?
Yeah.
Can we say that Uganda, that has a man who's been in power again since I was a little child? Do you think that we are ready to compare ourselves to the EU? Do you think that what is missing in this conversation where we want to build an Africa that is united, but we are not getting there? I mean, I know that we cannot climb a tree from the top, and that's the part that I think, okay, Africans are not, we are not realistic when we have these conversations. And also the security thing, this, whenever I see Larry Mado, he's one of our favorite journalists, CNN journalists. He's Africa's, he's our, I don't know, Larry. So we see him
I
as
know.
someone who speaks for us because he's fearless. He's not so much about let me do things only the European way. No, he's going to talk about issues. If they happen to him when he's off duty, he's going to talk about them. He's going to talk about Africa with pride. So why? Now I lost my train of thought when I talked about Larry.
You were talking about the comparison in terms of
Yes,
weather capacity.
yes. Security. I was going to this point that when Larry talked about this once, many months ago, last year. And I remember I went there to compare Europe to African nations. And I talked about security because I don't see people talking about security when they say we build together. And I want to know, is it fair that we can say, you know what, no one should be worried about a passport, no one should be worried about this, but then we have all the security issues. I come from Kenya. I don't need to tell you what is going on around Kenya. Is it selfish of me to say, oh, hold on, wait a minute. Can we talk about what is going on around here? And I can point to very many different nations that are not protecting their people from the Al-Shabaab. And remember, the Al-Shabaab are all the way in Mozambique, causing trouble. They are on our borders, they're doing all these things. So my thing is like, why do we never talk about all these things? Why do we think that Europe just woke up one day? Finland has been colonized several times. First of all, they took someone's land, the Sami people. The Sami people are indigenous to parts of Finland, Russia, Norway, and Denmark. So first of all, they did the colonial thing. They took their land, but then they were also colonized by Russia. They're next door. They were also colonized by Sweden. So they did not wake up one day and just in one day decide, okay, everything is gonna be working. Everything is working. It took work to get to the point where they are. Why are we not talking about this?
I'll first start with I don't know. Let me just start there. So I don't seem like an expert, but I'll just share a couple of thoughts that maybe I'll bring something home. I think the first thing I think about from an European perspective, in terms of like the European Union, like you said, is how did the European Union form, right? So I mean, there's a lot of, without want to digress too much, maybe just a little bit. Some of what the countries in the European Union today, we are actually a part of a broader Roman Empire, right? Which sort of broke out and became nations. And what has made them form again is not really there's not much of a difference in terms of the different nations and even the way Africa is set up, so to speak. It's just that there was a collective effort intended to go out there. So how do I put it? Like the Roman Empire was controlled a vast part of, Europe and some parts of like northeastern-ish Africa, so to speak, right? There've been a bunch of empires like Ottoman Empire. There's been the Egyptian, for those who kind of know a little bit about like all the way back in some sense. But the point I'm getting at is they had a collective purpose, which is initially when it came to Africa, they came as separate nations. After the breakout of the Roman Empire, later on, they were all intended, they were pursuing influence. The influence the Roman Empire had, all the other countries were on a race to pursue influence, which is what led to there's mixed reasons, but also part of what led to what they call exploration, which is essentially just invasion of other people's homes, claiming that people were not there. But then when they started fighting in Africa because in Africa, we all know, was it Angola? I can't remember. Remember some of the stories. There were certain European countries who fight each other, or one will partner with an African nation, community or nation that, let's say, they were already doing business with or whatever it is before, trade with, to fight against another European nation who they felt was a threat to come in to get influence in their part, right? It was when they started fighting each other and sort of killing each other and all of that, they went and decided to sit back and say, you know what, instead of doing that. So there was a goal, but that goal was not a great goal, like it was a goal to exploit other people. It's like, okay, instead of us going, let us, who are the most influential, powerful nations that other people cannot sort of like overpower, let us decide this is how we want to share territory. And I mean, there's been a lot of like stuff written about how some of the things like Italy, and I say Italy specifically, was not happy about today is because they didn't get a really good portion of the share of Africa, so to speak, when they went to sit down. So they had this goal to exploit other people, which was one of the foundations of what is the European Union today, right? So, I mean, so I don't want us to make that comparison of like, do you get what I mean? Like, I don't think it was always just came together and they're like, oh, they truly had security interests. That was really what built up the foundation for what is European Union. And today, that's why you have things like NATO. Today, it's still there because it's that let us together go out there and exploit the world, because collectively we can overpower all these people versus if we do it individually or fighting ourselves. I mean, think about the Brits and the Americans in America. They used to fight each other with the French rather, right? And even America got part of what is America now because they were fighting with the Brits, and French sold part of that to America. If you know a little bit about the history of how the US is today. So it's that let us collectively go together. And that's why NATO's, one of NATO's standards are if you arm one, you arm all of them. It's this idea that together, let us go out there and sort of colonize and loot. That's really the foundation of the European Union. So, I mean, and somebody has said this before, and I'm not saying that I'm suggesting it, but say people think that love is stronger than hate. Hate is actually a stronger force for, and when I say hate, it can be encompassed in, for example, you have to hate people for you to want to harm them to take their stuff, right? That's just the reality. Like, people will say it's just business, or that's just stupid, right? Because you have to hate people to do that. You have to build hate for people to justify that. Like Mary Makeba would say, right? Colonizer has to justify their invasion, right? They're not going to say, that's why they write history in the way they write it. It's that hate was a stronger force to come and exploit all these people, right? So maybe we don't have that much of a strong force, which I'm just saying, do you get what I mean in some sense? But we have to have a reason collectively that we all agree. So that reason might be, oh, we hate that the fact that we are being constantly exploited. But we all have to come to that conclusion that we hate it. And as people, we can't wait for our leaders to come to that conclusion, because our leaders are part of people that exploit us too, in some sense, right? They're partners. Because let's not forget that many people in power today were within families. Like you gave the example of the governor who came from a family of whatever it is. The many people in power today are within families of those who benefited from slave trade. They are, because we think money doesn't just go poof, right? They had this money, they invested it, do you know what I mean? And it keeps growing, and they have a lot of influence. You might not know all of them, but there are many people who are from, and so they have this like generational idea that they are the ones in control and in charge, and they partner with all these people who they know have power over them from the perspective of violence, because they have the weapons and all of that. So if they threaten that they're going to do what they can do and they are willing and can do it, they do it, right? So I mean, the point is, we have to all come to a collective decision that we are tired, for example, of being exploited on our own land, our resources being taken, and we can't even get proper health care and all these things that you see, right? I mean, I was reading, I don't know if it's true exactly, because you know you have to confirm some of these sources. Burkina Faso's president leader saying something about they wanted to build the biggest hospitals, and they were giving people students now in school, I think 2 meals a day at least, and its focus was education, healthcare, and they wanted everybody to have access. I mean, you make a good point, is why should our leaders, it's abhorrent. If it doesn't show to anybody that our leaders are not truly in our interest, I don't know what else will show you when somebody decides that they're going to fly abroad somewhere else to go for healthcare. I mean, every private citizen can do that. But if you are the leader of a nation who everybody is looking up to for development, and you are doing that, then it shows me that you have no interest in it, because you should be the example. You can't start a vision. You can't say you want to drive a goal or a vision and a mission, and you are not a part of it. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Another thing too, though, is how are we thinking about healthcare? We should also maybe not think about healthcare and always base our progress by comparing with our Europeans to things, because what I've observed is a lot of the systems that they have were also systems that were copied from us, and in many ways have been bastardized because the focus has now become making money. I mean, I'll give you an example. Healthcare in the US is one big example. Healthcare contributes 20% to GDP, 20%. And like you said, there are people who tomorrow they're subject to their job because they need healthcare access, insurance payments. They can't leave their job because of that. And there are many people who don't have that, right? Who are on the brink of homelessness. The next day they don't have their job, and it's not a joke. The people doing 3 jobs. So people see like the US and think like it's all rosy and beautiful. The vast majority of people are actually struggling, right? And that's the reality. That's just the reality, just the truth. And so we have to start rethinking it and say, okay, how do we rethink healthcare where we're getting the best value, but not necessarily thinking about it from an exploitative perspective? Because I've been seeing a lot of investment in healthcare now. People come in and saying they want to do stuff in healthcare. And I'm very wary of it because we might turn to a place where, yes, they will give you healthcare, but they will milk out of you and people will really struggle. And if government has to pay for healthcare, they will still milk it, and we'll just realize government is paying a lot of our resources as subsidies. So
it's happening in Kenya right now. It's happening in Kenya right now. People are tired. They're taking money. They come with a new system every other day and nothing is working. People are getting scammed by the government. And this is, again, thank you for saying that we shouldn't always compare, because if you're comparing Finland, if you're emulating Finland, yes, I can say yes, that can work. If you're emulating healthcare in the US, you are enslaving your people.
Yeah,
you are enslaving your people and you are scamming them. So 100%.
Yeah. So I think that we have to start thinking about it and saying, okay, also another thing about healthcare that I think is important, since we're talking about healthcare, is in Western nations, right, they're very dependent on drugs. And we must understand that a lot of the model is to manage your symptoms and not to actually cure you. To manage your symptoms, which is the reason why it's a big contributor to GDP, because they're managing symptoms. Now, like for example, what's the example? How they do this? Natural healing medicines or things that God put on the earth for us, right, that we've been using for generations. What we can do is to research into those things and find a way to regulate the use of natural healing remedies in some sense, right? But I think our focus has been to stay with this Western system where they decide that this natural healing products, we're going to figure out what the chemical components or the compound structure is. Then we're going to extract it or replicate it in a lab. And then we're going to ban the use of that particular natural remedy that we are extracting or duplicating its compound structure, and then patent this one because we can't patent something natural. So there's this conversation I think is important. I just want to touch quickly on this point, this concept of patent. People think the idea of patent is such a great thing, it's like a great idea. We don't understand. Patent was a system created to legalize the theft of other people's things, other people's ideas. Because if you go look at like enslaved America at a point in time, there were many inventions that were made as a result of necessity of the people that were enslaved, which were stamped names of their masters, so to speak, as the inventors. Even today, it's like, oh, if I create something and I can go put it on a label such that nobody else can use it or duplicate it because I have to make money out of it. So you can think about the concept in itself is exploitative. It's like, and they say, oh, because of that, so that people can invest in this. Now, I can see arguments for it. But if you think about it, the goal is to make money. It was never intended to cure people. The goal is to make money. And people can have arguments around, oh, that doesn't make sense and all that, but it's within a capitalist system. So we have to take capitalism out of healthcare. In my own opinion, that's what I think. We have to take capitalism out of healthcare because healthcare should be a right for citizens. Healthcare, food, water should be a right for citizens. I think it was Nestle CEO that was questioning whether, these are people who do business in our countries, and they're questioning whether water should be a right for human beings. They think that people thinking water should be a right for human beings is an extremist idea. And I'm just like, that is wild to me. So, I'll end there by saying that let us not compare and let us think about how we might be able to transform some of the ways we already do things locally, but improve upon them and make them, I mean, it doesn't have to be the fanciest buildings, but as long as there's safety and we're paying our healthcare workers as well, because that's also another important factor, right? So that they're not all getting educated here and then, being transferred abroad because that's where they get like, I mean, that's my thoughts on that one.
So much. I mean, oh my goodness. Like every time we have these conversations, I always think, I don't think we have enough time. We do not have enough time because there's so many things to cover. And I need to say something before I forget this, because you meant like we keep talking about doing things for ourselves. We keep talking about what can we as individuals do to change things and not just rely on the leaders who are just, they are greedy, they are accustomed to theft. They don't really care about us. And I just remembered something. There's this content creator. He's called Kingsley, and he's based in Switzerland. I've posted his content on my LinkedIn several times. And I remember, I mean, this is someone I've been following for quite a while. I've participated in conversations on his lives. And I remember there's one thing he was always insisting on last year. It was about stop waiting for that African or that one person to speak for you. Stop waiting for the person you're accustomed to seeing speaking. He has always insisted, you do it. You create your own content. You say something. Like everything we've done here, I'm already thinking there's so many topics. So when I create my content, I have supporting information. I have supporting documents from here. So it's our responsibility as people, as African people, to contribute in our own way. When we talk about coming together and partnering on business, what is stopping? We have a lot of people who have privileges. I'm not saying all of us do, but we do have a lot of people who have privileges, financial and economic privileges in Africa. What is stopping them from using those privileges, going to their African neighbors or just Africans in the diaspora? What has been stopping us? And I'm getting to my point. Back to Kingsley. So Kingsley has been preaching this information. And, Kingsley is like, Africans, we talk very freely. We are not always thinking about, what you have to behave like this. When we have our conversations, as you can see, I'm not trying to regulate myself to sound the Queen of England. No, I'm just being myself because we're very passionate people. And he has done, I have noticed, he himself, he's not just been talking about things. He is now doing it because they just launched. This is a person who started just the other day, a few years ago, on TikTok. And now I see in Switzerland that they've come together with Africans from different African countries. They have come together with them and they have partnered, and they're having this, I think the best way to describe it, I know it's a food business. I think it's a mobile truck business or something. I don't have the details of like where they go or how often. But my point is, he himself, as a content creator, has decided, okay, let me partner. And he has partnered with someone I'm also following. So a woman, by the way, a Black woman, and also another Black man from a different, not from Nigeria, because he's from Nigeria. And they're doing this. Now, I'm just trying to share something nice. Can you imagine the excitement I feel to see people I've had conversations with, or people that I've seen, or people I'm connected with on social media? They've come together and they're doing something for themselves. And I hope that I'm trying to mention this to inspire people to understand that people in the diaspora, we should not just be about speaking about or critiquing our governments, critiquing our systems. We should be able to be doing more. You and I are doing our part. We are meeting together. I don't have to be from Nigeria to speak to my brother from Nigeria. You do not have to be Kenyan to speak to your sister to Kenya. But we do it, and we come together and we discuss these things. And this is how it starts. So my final words, and I want you to also have a closing statement about the future you want for us to have, where we are not reliant on development aid. But I will say that I would hope that we start taking these lessons and start taking these complaints that we have about what is going wrong and start turning them into something positive, because every single person has power. You may not have the financial power, but you have a Facebook account, you have a TikTok account, you have a LinkedIn account, you have something. Find a way to use it to bring our African people together, because coming together is the only way we can fight neocolonialism. A small African country, Djibouti, is not going to be able to fight neocolonialism by themselves.
Yep.
Kenya is not never going to do it by themselves. We need to do it together, and we have to lead by example. We have to work together. So please
Yep.
give me a closing statement on what you think we need to do as Africans.
I mean, I think first I'll speak to like maybe people in the diaspora, right? I think it's very important to understand that, because I hear a lot of these things where people compare like cost of, let's say, buying things versus buying from an African store. And I get that some people are exploitative, I get it, but we don't understand their cost structure. I'll say even within, you have to think about supporting those within. That's one. Then what you talked about is very important, right? Because the only way you can support those within is first start talking about it. I mean, first start thinking about these things. Think about it, get involved with it. I see a lot of like these meme pages that say a lot of things that are not useful. I mean, they can be fun, but not useful. And the reason why these guys get a lot of like attraction, content, and followers is because people want it. So instead, start looking for content that teaches you about the continent and gets you a lot more involved. Do it, like do it for your own good. It's for your children's to go do it. So that the more you do it, like you said, we're talking about it, the more other people start to talk about it, other people start to look for it and see it. The more that starts to spur conversation around, because what you focus on, right, sort of becomes your reality. The more people start to partner to do business. So get involved. I mean, if there's only one thing I say, get involved by looking for information and talking about the continent and how we can develop. Because no matter where you are, if the African continent is not dependent and strong, you will never truly be respected wherever you are. You will never truly feel safe wherever you are. And that's the reality, right? That's just true. I mean, let's be honest. A lot of American citizens feel safe, even in some of the most dangerous countries. And when I say safe, I just said overall, because they have the confidence that those people understand what their country can do in terms of response to harm to them. And that's why you see many of them go across the world and sometimes misbehave and act like they own the world in some sense. So, I mean, it's very important that we understand it. This idea that we think we can find safety and comfort by just making money elsewhere is not really going to solve the problem. So get involved, please. I mean, that's the only thing I'll say. I say get involved, both in your mind, and start talking about these things so that hopefully we start to take action, right? I mean, yes, critique the government, but get involved. I mean, that's, I think, what I'll say, get involved.
Thank you so much. I always feel like every time we have these sessions, and I have to first really thank you, because this is not the first time you're joining me to have these conversations. So I know your love for Africa is the love I have for Africa as well. So, but I always feel every time we meet, I feel not even meeting, even when we have conversations on LinkedIn where we meet, where we've all met, all the guests who've come to this, we've met to this event, we've met there. Every time we have these conversations, I feel like I have learned so much. Even though we do have a lot of similarities in our thoughts, I always feel like I'm learning so much more every time. So this is why it's beneficial to actually voice and actually have actual conversations. Don't let what you're thinking remain here by yourself. Don't let it remain just with your family members. Don't let it remain just with your partner, your wife, your children, your husband. Speak to other people who are not in your immediate circle, because it does things. And already I'm thinking about things we could do together to promote, whether it's writers from Africa, talking about investments in Africa, talking about how we can have safe choices when people are even leaving Africa to come study abroad. You know, people actually knowing the truth about what is, waiting for them. In Finland, I've talked about this a lot of times. Right now, we have a podcast, and they're still talking about how Kenyans are suffering in Finland, the same country that is ranked as the happiest. But those Kenyans are not the happiest because they have been described as scavenging and picking bottles in the streets. Because usually, when you pick bottles in Finland, you can take them to this. I don't know what word to use, but you can collect bottles. We have machines, and you collect money from that, and you can get quite and then go inside the shop and buy your food. But this is how they are surviving, and it's because they chose to come to Finland. They probably didn't have all the information. So I'm already thinking about how can we have conversations that make sure that we're not just safe in Africa, but we're also safe abroad. So many things, and it's all because of having these conversations, these live conversations together. So I really want to thank you for coming. And I also thank every single person who supports us, supports this event. And we're going to have more of this. And I'm going to start having this at a decent time, because people are usually working now. or people are just, some are sleeping, depending on where you are. So
Yeah.
with the next event, it's going to be much, much later, 100%. So thank you so much, Olu. And let's keep having these conversations, and let's never stop prioritizing ourselves like other people do. There's nothing wrong in that. It's our time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mary. Appreciate it.
So
Thank you.
much.
All right.
Asante sana. Bye-bye.